This is my first video update coming to you from Nicosia, Cyprus on this Monday morning. Let's talk about some news. Let's do a quick update as to what's going on with the grain deal and this drone attack in Sevastopol. We have the New York Times running an article over the weekend saying that it was indeed Ukraine that launched this drone attack against these ships in Sevastopol. Now, these Ukraine drones, perhaps with British sponsorship and planning, these drones were actually targeting the ships that were protecting the cargo ships, the cargo tankers. So the Ukraine drones, from what I understand, weren't actually going after the ships carrying cargo. They were going after ships that were meant to protect the grain cargo ships. So that's an update from the New York Times. They are saying that Ukraine did indeed do this, and there's all kinds of video evidence as well that is all over the interwebs showing this. Now, Russia, the Russian ministry, what they did yesterday is that they hit at the city of Ochakov in the Nikolaev region. This is the city where Russia claims the British are hunkered down in. This is where you have British military planning and preparing all of these attacks for the Ukraine military, and this includes the attack in Sevastopol, as well as other attacks in Ukraine. So this city in the Nikolaev region is kind of where the British military, they're staging all of this stuff, and so the Russians hit at that city in Nikolaev. Now, a lot of people say, well, if the Russians know that the British are there and they're staging all of these things, how come they didn't hit at them earlier? I don't have an answer for that. The only thing that I could say about that is that perhaps the Russians didn't want to hit out at these British forces or these British planners, allegedly British forces and British planners in this region, because they didn't want to escalate things. They didn't want to ramp things up. But now that they have the information, the confirmation, the evidence that these planners are doing these things, well, now they can hit at them. They are party to the war. They're fair game. That's just my assumption, but I don't really have an answer to why the Russian military wasn't hitting at this city all this time. Maybe they weren't 100% sure that it was this city of Ochakov that was being used as a staging ground. I don't know. With regards to the grain deal, everyone is flipping out in the collective West. The United States, Biden, Blinken, the European Union, Van der Crazy, NATO. NATO is telling Russia, you better not pull out of this grain deal, or else the entire collective West, they're freaking out. Now, one of the reasons they're freaking out about the grain deal, and it has nothing to do with hunger. Ναι. Το αρχείο πληθυσμού, δεν ξέρω. Σχολείο πρέπει να είναι. Ναι. Έγινε. What was I saying? Yeah, the grain deal. One of the reasons that they're so mad about the grain deal is because they were all making money. A lot of these people in this grain deal were making all kinds of cash. The Zelensky regime was making cash. Turkey, from what I understand, was making cash because they were processing this grain coming out of Ukraine. And of course, there were all kinds of other players and middlemen that I'm positive were making money from this grain leaving the port of Odessa and mostly heading into Europe. Nothing happens in Ukraine unless there are all kinds of oligarchs and corrupt politicians from all over the world making money. That's just the way it is in Ukraine. And the grain that actually was leaving the port of Odessa was not even going to countries that needed it, to poorer countries. And let me give you some stats here, because I've got some statistics, and I think these statistics shed some light as to the real beneficiaries of this Ukrainian grain. From August to October, 350 out of 455 ships were sent from the unblocked ports of Ukraine to developed countries, with 6.1 out of 9.3 million tons, or 66% of the Ukrainian grain and its products. Statistics and distribution are calculated according to the UN and marine traffic. 65% of exported products are fodder, i.e. livestock, feed. Countries with starvation, serious starvation rates, where more than 10% of the population suffers from malnutrition, got only 1.18 million tons, or 13% of cereals, including 25% of wheat. In particular, 11 ships with 0.36 million tons of grain, 4% went to the poorest countries in Africa. Total Ukrainian grains transported, 9.3 million tons. Spain got 1.8, or 19% of the total weight. Turkey got 1.29, or 14%. Italy 0.86. China 0.84, Netherlands 0.55, Egypt 0.42, Bangladesh 0.27, Romania 0.25, Israel 0.24, and Germany 0.22. Other countries 2.59, or 28%. In total, NATO countries and their allies got 6.15 million, or 66% of the 9.3 million. Poor countries with serious starvation rates, 1.18 million tons. Now, Russia, they have 80% of their grain exports are wheat, but the sanctions, they're preventing these grain exports from being delivered. And these grain exports could actually go to countries, to poor countries that need the food. But because of sanctions, the grain from Russia is having a hard time finding its way to the poor countries. Now, this brings me to a very important clarification with regards to the grain deal. Now, I did a video about this grain deal in, I believe it was June, July. I think July is when the grain deal was put together. And in the video, I talked about how the grain deal is actually not one deal, but two deals. In other words, it's two documents. The one document is this Odessa grain document, which I've just read you the statistics. Most of the grain, the fodder for livestock, most of it is fodder for livestock, from what I understand. And a lot of it gets sent to Europe and NATO countries. Most of it is sent to EU, NATO countries. The other part of the grain deal that Russia, Turkey, the UN, and Ukraine agreed to in July, the important part of that deal, the second document, had to do with Russia exporting grain. So Russia agreed to this corridor to help secure this corridor and safeguard this corridor to get the grain out of Odessa and mostly into Europe, on the condition that Russian grain, and there's a lot of it, could get to markets that need it. And that's what they brokered in July. And sanctions were lifted on Russian fertilizer, grain, and wheat from the US, from Europe. All the sanctions were lifted, and Russia was supposed to have the ability to get its grain to markets. But what happened is that the collective West, they placed sanctions, not on the grain, they lifted those sanctions, but they placed sanctions on ships. And they started to make it difficult for insurers to insure those ships as well. So everything got complicated, not to mention the payment of the grain. So the sanctions complicated the delivery of the grain, and so the grain wasn't allowed to reach markets in need. So the entire deal has been poisoned from the get-go. So for Russia to pull out is basically them saying, look, the deal that we had in place was not only about Odessa, but it was about us making sure that we can get our grain to countries that need it. And Russia even offered free grain to countries that are in need. But that never came to pass, because the collective West have put so many sanctions in place, and they've made such a mess of the sanctions that the countries can't get the grain. And so Russia is basically saying, we're out of the grain deal. You guys attacked our ships, so we can't safeguard the delivery of grain from Odessa. And you know what else? The other part of the grain deal is not really benefiting us, because we can't get our product to the markets that want to buy it, so we're better off on our own. And that's exactly what Russia is doing now. They're letting countries know, look, work with us. Let's find a way to get the grain that we have to you, and figure out a way to work around these sanctions. And there's a lot of grain that is stuck in various ports around the world, including European ports, that can't make its way to the countries that need it because of all the sanctions. And that is the reality of the grain deal. So it was a two-part deal. It wasn't just Odessa. There was another component to it, and the collective West wasn't, they weren't honoring that component. Now, the narrative that Russia is now using food as leverage, or they're blackmailing the world for food, is a lie, is a flat out lie. It's just not true. And it's not true for the reasons that I gave you just now. I explained. Russia has the grain. They want to get the grain from Russia, not from Ukraine. They want to get the grain, the wheat, the fertilizer from Russia to the countries that need it. But because of sanctions, they're not allowed to do it. And perhaps if Russia is able to just work on its own and just do its own deals without all of this UN, collective West, Turkey coordinating group, all of these things, perhaps if Russia can just do this stuff on its own, maybe it'll get the grain to where it needs to go, maybe. So that's the situation with the grain deal. And let's now talk about what do we need to talk about? My God, U.S. to deploy nuclear bombers to Australia. Yeah, I saw that this morning. They're ramping up with China. They are ramping up with China in a big, big way. Even in September, by the way, the UN was complaining about how sanctions are preventing Russian wheat from Russia from making it to the countries that need it. That was in September. Anyway, so we've got bombers heading to Australia. We've got more talk about Finland getting nukes, wanting nukes, asking for nukes. Now, a lot of people are saying, oh, well, Finland is not really asking for these nukes, and these are just reports in the NATO documents. Yeah, I can see that, but as with what's happening in Australia, bombers in Australia, what do you think is going to happen with Finland? The collective West, NATO, I think they've decided which countries they're going to now use to be the next staging grounds for escalation with Russia and with China. And Australia is going to definitely be one of them. And Finland's going to be the other, because when NATO loses the conflict in Ukraine, which it will lose, it has only two options: wither away and die, or ramp things up in Finland, because NATO has nowhere else to expand. Once Ukraine is blocked off, once the expansion in Ukraine is blocked off, where can NATO go? It can't go to Georgia. It can't go to, I don't know, Armenia, Azerbaijan, or any of the countries in the Caucasus. It can't push east. It's done. There's nowhere else to go. Where's NATO going to go? Africa, the Middle East? No. NATO's hope was to surround Russia by taking out Ukraine and then moving into Georgia and then pushing through the Caucasus to completely surround Russia in the south. But there we go. Green. That was a long green. But that's not going to happen. So what does NATO do? What's left for NATO? Well, the only thing left for NATO is Finland. Sweden, Finland, that's it, the north. So its only option is going to be, it's only two options. It only has two options. Either NATO stops expanding, which means NATO's done, it's dead, or it pushes the envelope in Finland. And of course, you can have this NATO Pacific thing, which they're trying to cook up, and they're already making their moves in Australia. Big news there in Australia. We're gonna have to keep an eye out for this escalation with regards to China. Clown World? Should we do two Clown Worlds? Because I got two really good Clown Worlds, and I don't even know if I can talk about the one Clown World. Protests in Moldova as well, by the way. Big protests. They want the government out. These are legit protests. The police got very violent with the protesters, but they're not stopping. The people of Moldova, they're suffering. The living costs are too much. Inflation, energy prices. They want their government out. And this is a government that is sponsored by the European Union. So according to EU rules, these protesters are bad because they want the EU government, the EU-sponsored puppet government out. But these protesters are legit. They have legitimate concerns. Absolutely. So that was also happening over the weekend. Let's do two quick Clown Worlds. And, oh boy, let's see. Let's get the hard one out of the way. The one that I'm not even going to really talk about it too much, but that's the Pelosi story. The Paul Pelosi's husband, and what happened in his home with the police and the break-in and the hammer and all of that stuff. Now, we're all adults here, and I think we all know what happened and what's going on. So I'm not even going to get to the details of it. You can look it up. But we are adults, and we all know what's at play. The only thing I want to say about this Clown World is two things. The first Clown World part of it is that they're trying to actually say this is some MAGA thing, which is ridiculous. I don't even need to get into detail as to why it's ridiculous. But the other thing is that I think this incident, it shows how the deep state controls the politicians and the families of politicians. And what do I mean by that? I mean that all of these interesting, crazy, maybe you could say degenerates, maybe, predicaments that all of these powerful politicians find themselves stuck in, all of this stuff, all of this compromising information about their lives and their proclivities and their interesting fetishes is stuff that the deep state absolutely has. And I have no doubt about it that these types of quirks are things that the deep state uses to exert control over these people that rule over us, or that have been put in place to rule over us. That's all I'm going to say about that. That's what I think this incident may indicate. A lot of facts are still coming out, but I think in general we understand the dynamics of this clown world. Now, the other clown world that I have is an interesting story, and it's from a tweet from Kim.com. Now, Kim.com put out a tweet, and he said this. He said, "How do the Russians know that the UK blew up the Nord Stream pipelines in partnership with the US? Because Liz Truss used her iPhone to send a message to Secretary Blinken saying it's done. That's a quote. It's done. A minute after the pipeline blew up and before anybody else knew, iCloud admin access rocks. And then he sent a follow-up tweet which said it wasn't the phone that was hacked. Context. And then he links to a BBC article. So there was an article that ran in UK media saying that Liz Truss's phone was hacked. And they ran with Russia hacked the phone. Now, I looked at the article, and from what I understand, there is an investigation in place, but they're not 100% certain that Russia hacked this. Actually, I want to go this way. That Russia hacked this phone. They're working on the assumption that Russia allegedly hacked this phone. That's what I understand from what I read. So they're just assuming blame to Russia because, well, you know, you got to blame Russia for everything. Kind of like Nord Stream. Germany, investigates Nord Stream, and they begin the investigation under the assumption that Russia did it, right? So they're doing the same thing with this phone hack. They're not sure who hacked it. Why couldn't the U.S. hack it? I mean, Obama was listening into Angela Merkel's phone calls, right? So the U.S. could have been the ones that were listening into the phone calls. But anyway, there is an investigation. Liz Truss's phone was hacked, and you have this tweet from Kim.com. Now, I don't know if this is true or not. I haven't seen any evidence other than this tweet from Kim.com, who I guess is alleging that he got this from an iCloud backup. I don't know, or someone got it from iCloud. But I haven't seen any evidence that Liz Truss actually sent it to Blinken saying it's done. Is Liz Truss dumb enough to do something like that? Absolutely. She is absolutely dumb enough to do something like that. But she wasn't secretary of... she wasn't the foreign minister at that time when everything happened with regards to Nord Stream. She was actually prime minister when the Nord Stream sabotage happened. So that leaves me a little suspicious. Would Liz Truss, being prime minister, send a text to Anthony Blinken, an unsecured SMS or a text message to Anthony Blinken, who is the Secretary of State, saying it's done? I don't know. Maybe Liz Truss just has Anthony Blinken on her phone, and she chats with Blinken, and she just felt comfortable telling him that. I don't know. But the whole thing sounds a little suspicious. But we'll file it under Clown World, and we'll see if there's any legs to this tweet from Kim.com. I'm skeptical, to say the least. But who knows? Liz Truss is dumb enough to do stuff like that. That's the one thing that makes me believe that this story could be true, is that you have someone like Liz Truss in the upper tier of the UK government. Anyway, guys, that's the video. Duran.locals.com, Rockfin, and what else? Duran Shop, 10% off. Use the code. Good day. We're on Rockfin and Locals. That's what I wanted to say. Take care.